What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellow Show. My name's Kyle. Today, it's Sunday, June 23rd. Hope you're all doing well. We're going to be continuing our 32 teams projection series. We are now looking into the AFC North. We already covered the Baltimore Ravens yesterday, and today we're on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who I'm pretty excited for this season. If you guys haven't seen any of the other videos, I've already covered the AFC East, the NFC East, and now we're dabbling into the AFC North. So I'll probably post a link in the comments if you guys want to check out that playlist and see some of the other videos. But typically what we do here is we'll start with a 2023 review, and then we'll kind of click into the projections for 2024. We'll go position by position and kind of just talk it through there. So let's begin with the 2023 recap of the Cincinnati Bengals. It was an interesting year. They did go 9-8. They had good numbers, though. If you look at everything across the board, it was almost better in some ways than it was in 2022. But obviously, Joe Burrow played through some ankle injuries and a couple other things going on. Not the best season for Joe Burrow. He played fine. He was at 66.85 completion percentage, 2,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 INTs. He couldn't really run the ball very much as we're accustomed to. He didn't get any rushing touchdowns last year. So it was I'm kind of just wiping this year clean from my Joe Burrow memory, and I'm just going to say, hey, he was dinged up. The team had some issues, and we'll look forward to a better 2024. But the one key note here was they have a competent backup in Jake Browning. He actually played pretty well. In some regards, he played better than Joe Burrow. He had a better yards per attempt. He had a better completion percentage, and he threw a lot of passes. So, the touchdown interception ratio isn't as good as a Joe Burrow would do. But I was overall impressed with Jake Browning. Like, we were actually using him in super flex leagues as a QB too. So it looks like they did find their backup QB. Joe Mixon ran the ball fine. Jamar Chase was playing really well until he got hurt. But T. Higgins was in and out of the lineup. They didn't really have a true number two. Tyler Boyd's kind of just fine. And they had no tight end to speak of. So last year was kind of, we saw some weak spots on the Cincinnati Bengals offense, and I think they addressed it. But overall, the team, 68% completions, 4,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. They ran the ball okay, 383 rushing attempts for about 1,500 yards, which was nearly identical to what they did last year. So almost 4 yards a carry, 12 touchdowns, 0 fumbles on the year was pretty impressive when I saw that. And, not the best year, but despite all their injury woes and, not winning as many games as they did the year before, the offense still somehow kind of put out similar output as they did in 2022. So we're looking for more of those 2022 numbers. What I like about, Zack Taylor's been there for he's entering his 7th year with the team, or 6th year with the team. And we have a new offensive coordinator, Dan Pitcher, coming into the fold here, as Callahan is now the coach of the Titans. And if those that are unfamiliar with Pitcher, he's been with Cincinnati since 2016. He was a former college quarterback at Colgate and Cortland. He was their wide receiver coach for a year, took some time off, and then he got bumped up to offensive assistant at Cincinnati, and then he went to the quarterback's coach, and then now he's the offensive coordinator. So I don't expect the offensive identity to change all that much. He's probably going to, sit with what Brian Callahan kind of established there. So I'm still expecting, well over 600 passing attempts for this team, and kind of the same around. They don't run the ball a ton, but, right around 400 rushing attempts should be what we expect. So 2023 review, we're going to chalk it up to injuries to Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, the lack of a true pass-catching tight end, and, just lack of other weapons behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So we'll move into 2024 projections now. Let's look straight at Joe Burrow, and it sounds like he is fine and well. He's been a full participant in everything that I've seen so far. I have Joe Burrow going about 600 passing attempts, 400 completions, right at that 66.67% completion percentage, which honestly I think is too low. Because if you look at the last 4 seasons during Callahan's career, 68%, 68%, 69%, 64%. So I think I'm a little shy there. I might have to add some completions and get some more PPR stats to some of these guys here, as more catches should yield more opportunities for fantasy points. So 400 for 600, 4,600 passing yards, 7.69 yards per attempt. And, there's been some spike year for this offense, 8.66 back in, I think, 2020. 2021. That was 2021. My bad. 7.41 is kind of like the mean, I think, for Joe Burrow in these days. So I'm kind of projecting somewhere in between there. So about 7.69 yards per attempt, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and I have him running the ball a little bit more than definitely more than last year. I think he's going to be more comfortable with that ankle injury. So about 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Joe Burrow has, he gets rushing touchdowns. He had 5 in 2022, 2 in 2021, 3, and then it looks like, that was his last time. So Joe Burrow, he's going to scoot for a few touchdowns, and he's going to be a fringe top 5 quarterback. Like, if everything stays right, I really like what this team did. They bring in Zach Moss, which is fine. I think he's a competent runner, but they draft Jermaine Burton. You have the year 2 development of either Andre Yoshivas or Charlie Jones, and then they bring in a pass-catching tight end and Mike Gesicki. And obviously Jamar Chase, T. Higgins entering the season healthy. So we'll see what happens there. I think Joe Burrow, for where he's being drafted right now, is a pretty good value. You kind of get him as QB 10. I have him as my QB 7 right now. So again, fringe top 5 QB. And honestly, after the top 3, I don't think there's that much separating the next few guys. So I kind of have Joe Burrow in that second or third tier of quarterbacks. And I want to target Joe Burrow in fantasy drafts this year. I think we're going to see the Bengals kind of come back and show us, just how good they are as an offense. So Joe Burrow, 2 thumbs up. Draft him if you can. And I was in a best ball today, and he was falling outside the top 100. So I mean, you're getting a guy in the 8th, 9th round of best ball drafts right now at a really cheap discount, a potentially top 5 quarterback every week. He's going to have some ups and downs, but his ceiling, we know, is pretty massive. So I like Joe Burrow. And then Jake Browning, I do have projected for about a game, which is fine. I try to project 15, 16 games for the starter, but I just have a feeling Joe Burrow is going to be pretty healthy this year. So we'll move on to the running backs. And the new look running back room features Zach Moss, Chase Brown, Trevion Williams, Chris Evans, and Elijah Collins. So the new name there is obviously Zach Moss. They let Joe Mixon go. They bring in Moss, who Moss was really decent last year for the Indianapolis Colts. And I think if you just kind of remove the name Zach Moss and just look at his stats from last year, you're like, okay, these were pretty good numbers. And I think putting him into this Bengals offense where they just need to be able to have the threat to run the ball for about 4 to 5 yards per carry. And Joe, I mean, if we're being real, Joe Mixon, he's shown decline over the last few years. They gave him a ton of touches, and they're not getting a lot out of it. Only 4 yards per carry, 3.88 the year before. 4.13. His days of being, a prime stud Joe Mixon are a few years behind him. So bringing in a younger Zach Moss, I think this could increase the efficiency in the running game. I have Moss being the lead back, about 190 rushing attempts, 875 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I do have him he's a pretty good receiving back as well. I just got to double check his pass catching, but 23 receptions, 30 targets, 155 yards and a touchdown. I think it's going to be kind of like a 2/3 split where Moss is the primary running back, but Chase Brown will get mixed in on 3rd downs and maybe 2-minute situations. I'm willing to change my mind though once we get to training camp and kind of figure this out. And I just realized that I did not turn on the the screen share. So I apologize for the last 8 minutes. I went without the screen share on. But either way, we're back now on it. So hopefully you guys can forgive me there. But Zach Moss, Chase Brown, I think these are the 2 backs that are going to split most of the time for Cincinnati this year. And once we get into training camp, if I start hearing things one way or the other, I will adjust my numbers. But I'm still kind of looking at Zach Moss in the 8th, 9th round. He's more of an 8th round pick now in best balls, which I find really interesting. So I like Moss. I don't think they're going to give him 250 some touches like they have been giving Joe Mixon. I think they like Chase Brown and they want to see what he can do as a change of pace role kind of player. So Chase Brown, I have 110 rushing attempts, 415 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. And then I do have him as the leading pass catching back, 32 receptions, 45 targets, 230 yards, and 2 TDs. And then Trevion Williams, Chris Evans, Elijah Collins, those guys are just kind of there. If those guys are playing, there's something happened to Moss and Chase Brown, so I wouldn't be too interested in any of those guys. But I think this running game can be more effective. I do want to look up something real quick. Bengals, our lads. So the one thing is they didn't really – the offensive line is kind of back for another run here, which is fine. They did draft Armarius Mims, so we'll see if he can, eventually get into the starting lineup here. But the offensive line should be somewhat of a strength this year, as they have some continuity going into this season. So the running game, total as a whole, I have them running a little bit more than they did last year, a little bit more success in yards per carry, and a few more rushing touchdowns. So I think it's a slight improvement over 2023. And honestly, it's probably going to be the best running game that we've seen out of Zack Taylor's offense, because ever since he's been there, the best yards per carry he's gotten is 4.1. This team has never ran for more than 1,700 yards, 1,742 essentially. So there's a chance that we could see this team run the ball better than we've seen in the past, and which wouldn't be a bad idea. But I think you have Joe Burrow; you want to make sure he's the focal point of the offense. But I'm drafting Zach Moss right now. I'm taking shots on Chase Brown, and I don't like pairing Zach Moss much with Joe Burrow, but I like getting Chase Brown with Burrow in Burrow stacks. But Zach Moss for me comes out as RB29, and then I do have Chase Brown as RB42. So I'm probably going to have to shift some things around. I think I want to get Zach Moss a little bit higher. I think he's going to be a quality player this year. And Chase Brown should be one of those guys on your bench that, if an injury happens to Moss, maybe we got something there. And I do think he's got standalone value as, a fringe RB2 flex most weeks, depending on if he's the primary pass catcher. So I like both backs, and I'd like to see both more involved this year. But we'll go into the wide receivers now. We're talking Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, who signed his franchise finally, Jermaine Burton, the rookie out of Alabama, Andre Yoshivas, Charlie Jones, and Trenton Irwin. It's obviously all Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase was lights out with Joe Burrow, despite Joe Burrow playing kind of gimpy. He had that one massive, I think it was like a 50-point fantasy game. And I still think we're yet to see the best season out of Jamar Chase. If we just look up Jamar Chase's numbers real quick. And let me see here. So, his best season was his rookie year, but we saw a huge spike in targets and receptions last year, despite missing a couple games. So I think you're probably looking at something where he's going to be in that 100 catch. He's probably going over 100 catches this year. I like him in the 150s for targets. And I do think we're going to see him maybe flirt with a new career high in yardage. I think the touchdowns are going to be hard, but I still have him, in that 9-10 range. So for me, I've got Jamar Chase at 117 receptions, 160 targets, 1,435 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I think after CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase should be the second receiver off the board over Tyreek Hill and the other guys there. So I'm all in on Jamar Chase this year. I take him a lot. I usually get him as the number 3 overall pick because, CMC and CeeDee Lamb are kind of the consensus top 2 guys. But if you're gun shy on CMC and you want to take Jamar Chase, I think that's fine. But we're looking at potentially a career season for Jamar Chase. And that's what I'm, when I'm making my first pick, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I don't think Tyreek Hill has a career season left in him yet. I think he's done a lot of his damage already. And if anything, his arrow could be pointing down just with him getting older. So same thing with Christian McCaffrey. I think CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase are 2 guys that I click a lot in the top 3 picks just because they're young ascending players and they're the focal point of their entire offense. I know CMC and Tyreek Hill are, but they're getting up there in age. And I just think we're yet to see the best of Jamar Chase. A full, healthy 17-game season of Jamar Chase would look pretty sweet. So draft Jamar Chase in the top 3, wherever you want, full PPR, half PPR, standard. Doesn't really matter what it needs to be. But T. Higgins is the next receiver on the list. And I'm a huge T. Higgins fan. He's had trouble staying healthy throughout the last few seasons. And now he's got this franchise tag, chip on his shoulder kind of thing where he has to have a really good year if he wants to make money next year in the free agency market. So for me, I have him being healthy and playing most of the year, 76 receptions, 125 targets, about 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Last year, he just wasn't on the field very much. 42 receptions, 76 targets, 656 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He did have some blow-up games, which was nice, but his I guess we'll look at his numbers over here. His career highs are achievable here. He could easily go over these 74 reception marks. He could easily hit 1,100 yards for the first time. And I wouldn't be surprised if he sets a career high in touchdowns. So I also think that T. Higgins is a guy When you're looking in the fourth round for a wide receiver, we're talking about a guy that could have a career season, and he's got that chip in on his shoulder where he needs to have a big year to make more money in the free agency market next year, or if he does somehow find a way to get a contract extension with the Bengals, that could work too. So I actually have T. Higgins getting a career year. I have him in career high in receptions, looks like reception yards and touchdowns. So I'm drafting T. Higgins a lot when I can. It's very difficult, though, to get T. Higgins on your team with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. I'm finding that stack to be very, very tricky to get. And then at wide receiver 3 here, you have the rookie Jermaine Burton, who I think is going to be the guy. They want to get that vertical element to the game. But I did hear Andre Yoshibas had some good offseason momentum at minicamps and OTAs. So keep an eye on him. But Jermaine Burton is kind of a deep threat. He can kind of, do some – he doesn't really do a lot of slot stuff, but I think they can move him around. But I'm excited for Joe Burrow to have a true deep threat. It's been a while. I mean, Jamar Chase, his rookie year, was a deep threat, but they kind of use him more in short stuff now. Whereas Jermaine Burton, he can be that vertical element to take the top off the defense and kind of clear it out for the guys to work underneath. So I have Burton as the clear number 3 target, 51 receptions, 80 targets, 645 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think he's really easy to get on a Joe Burrow stack, so look for him when you go there. We'll watch training camp in the news reports there to see if Yoshivas is running with the ones or if it's Burton or if they're switching. I do have Andre as the number 4, 45 targets, 24 receptions, about 245 yards and a touchdown. And then Charlie Jones, Trent Irwin, these guys are just at the bottom of the depth chart. But we'll see. We got some good competition for wide receiver 3 here. You got a healthy Jamar Chase, and you got a T. Higgins that's very hungry to make his big-time contract. So draft the Bengals receivers when you can. And let's finish up with the tight ends. Now, regardless of how you feel about Mike Gesicki, it wasn't too long ago where he had some really big numbers with the Miami Dolphins. And believe it or not, he was actually the guy that led all Patriots skill players in slot snaps last year, which I found pretty interesting. And Tyler Boyd, in the entire NFL last year, Tyler Boyd actually led everybody in slot snaps. So I think there's a huge amount of slot snaps available on this Bengals offense. And I actually think it could be Mike Gesicki who benefits from that. It's not too long ago. Again, he had 112 targets, 85 targets, 89 targets in Miami his first couple seasons, a career high of 780 yards and 6 touchdowns. I don't think he's in for a career year, but if he hits 85 to 89 targets, I'm not going to be surprised. I think he could be a 700-yard tight end, 50 catches this year and 5 or 6 touchdowns. It sounds like he's having a nice training camp so far. And I have him at 50 catches, 75 yards, about 50 receptions, 75 targets, 595 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And I'm drafting the hell out of Mike Gesicki right now in best balls because you can get him around 19. Which just feels too cheap as a third tight end. And they got Drew Sample. They drafted Eric All, who's kind of a project. And then I do like Tanner McLaughlin long-term as well. But I think Mike Gesicki, his ability in the slot, I think the Bengals are going to take advantage of. And I mentioned Tyler Boyd finally gone, led the entire NFL in slot snaps. And they don't really put T. Higgins in the slot. They do sometimes. They do like to put Jamar Chase in the slot, but I don't think he's going to live in the slot all year long. I think they want to take advantage and basically bring that Tyler Eifert element back to this offense. I think that's what Mike Gesicki can do. And we know he's not a good blocker, but Bengals don't really probably care about that. They want a guy that can go out and catch the ball and kind of, move the seam and be a vertical element in the middle of the field. So I like Mike Gesicki quite a bit this year. I don't think Drew Sample, Eric All, McLaughlin, if those guys are out there doing something, it means Gesicki's probably hurt or something went wrong, or I don't know. But I'm willing to bet on Mike Gesicki this season. Again, he had some terrible Miami kind of phased him out. He still had 5 touchdowns that year, but his floor is this 2022 season where he's getting a few touchdowns and about 400 yards and 30, 40 catches. And New England just didn't really know how to use him. They tried him in the slot. It just didn't work well. So I'm all in on Gesicki this year. I'm curious if you guys are too. But let's finish up with the 2024 recap. I'll kind of show you guys where I have everybody going. In terms of tight ends, I got Mike Gesicki as tight end 15, which seems kind of crazy, but I'm drafting the hell out of him. So just think about it, okay? I think he could be a guy that bounces back, and hopefully he finds himself a home in Cincinnati as Joe Burrow's primary receiving tight end. So But again, we'll monitor the rookie tight ends and see how those guys are doing in camp. I do have Jamar Chase as the wide receiver 2. T. Higgins down here at wide receiver 25 for me. I think he's capable of being a strong wide receiver 2, but where he's being drafted, if you get him as your wide receiver 3, I think the positional value there looks really good. And then Jermaine Burton's just going to be a best ball pick. I don't think a redraft pick at all. Where is Jermaine Burton? Right here at wide receiver 71. So just kind of like a role player down there for you. And then again, I mentioned the running backs. I do have Zack Moss at RB29, which I kind of want to move up a little bit. And then Chase Brown, I'm kind of comfortable with Chase Brown being as like a wide receiver or running back 3 flex option for you. And it's really, we'll watch his training camp reports and see what he can do. And again, Joe Burrow, quarterback number 7. So pretty exciting offense, I think, here. We're going to probably get the best of the Bengals. I would hope so. You have everyone coming back healthy. You got guys that are hungry. You have, guys trying to revive their careers in Mike Gesicki. You got some young guys battling for wide receiver 3. And the running back 1 spot is kind of up for grabs. We don't know how that, that role is going to shake out. So draft your Bengals. Enjoy the season. Let me know what you guys think about some of my numbers. My too high on Gesicki, my too low on Higgins. Should I have Zack Moss as a top 24 running back, or are we not in on Moss? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But anyways, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.